research, experimentation, helping farmers and the public with agronomy, manure, and soil-related issues for almost 30 years. The man's been around for a while working on this stuff. He brings over 20 years of soil science to his work at WSU Puyallup, where he conducts on-farm research and supervises laboratory and field personnel. Andy will be talking today, and I'm trying to get this, there we go, crops and agronomic rate application, and we'll let you take it away.
Great.
You have that clicker?
Yeah, I got this thing. Can everybody hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Okay, I speak fairly loud, so I don't think you're going to have any trouble hearing me. So, yeah, I've been around for a while, which is why I know that the hydrometers got passed out years and years ago, because I was here when they were passed out. And why I'm very happy that people are moving to soil testing and manure testing rather than hydrometers, because I'm much happier with analytical results. So hopefully we'll keep you awake. I'm going to be sort of moving between some things up here and some papers on your front there and some stuff over there. So we're going to use everything that's there. So I'm going to talk about agronomic rates. So the first thing is, why do we care about manure PAN? So the first question, what is PAN? Plant available nitrogen. Because we have, in manure, we have organic forms of nitrogen, non-organic forms of nitrogen. So we have organic and we have ammonium. Ammonium will move to nitrate, become immediately available, where organic ones have to be mineralized. So hence, when we have 100 pounds of nitrogen in a manure, plant available will be somewhat less of that, depending on how you're applying it, when you're applying it, and a number of different things. So that's the story about what PAN is and why it's really important to you. And so that goes into some of these other things that have been mentioned earlier. Fertilizer cost, manure, spreading manure. You don't have to buy fertilizer to do that. If you're organic, it goes into the National Organic Program using it. Precision manure application equipment is becoming more possible. Cost of programs for things through equip you can get through proper manure management. Also, phosphorus. We spend a lot of time talking about nitrogen, but we can't forget about phosphorus. This is becoming more and more the limiting factor on manure application. Once your soils get too high in phosphorus, you have to start managing your manure on a phosphorus-based system, and that will then lower your application rates, and you're going to have more land to spread your manure on. So here's the nitrogen cycle. We've seen this at least twice earlier. We're going to show it again. Every soil scientist loves their own form of the nitrogen cycle. And the thing to remember is we start with manure way over here. We apply it to the ground. It goes, mineralizes, will go to ammonium, and then nitrate, which becomes plant available, and then the crop takes it up for growth. And that's about as far as I'm going to go with that, because you've already had it 3 times. So the thing in soils with pools of nitrogen, and why nitrogen is so important, we have the stable or soil nitrogen, which would be considered the end from organic matter, because it's stable, it's been there for a long, long time. And then we have these other 2 pieces, the living dead or crop residues, things that have, like roots and such, not like that, that are hanging out in the soil. And then we have the active soil nitrogen pool, which is stuff that's either been manure that's just been applied, or cover crops that's just been plowed down. So all of these play a part in nitrogen cycling agronomic rates for different crops in your system. The thing that I really want to hit home about for this is how when you apply manure, it's an additive. What you get from it this year is X. What you get from it next year is less than X, but it's still something. And the year after that, it's a little less than the X before, so it becomes an additive. We have on this chart, the blue is the available, where the yellow is the unavailable. So in year 1, we get some portion of it available, and then from that first year application, in the second year we still get what we would apply the first year plus the second year off of what's been applied the first year. Excuse me. And then the third year you get what's been applied from the first year, the second year, and what you apply the third year and the portions of the other ones. So it becomes additive, and this gets added up fairly quickly. and why we have trouble determining how much N we get from soils, because we have this active soil pool that we have. We've only gone to 5 years here, but many of the folks in here have been farming this ground much more than 5 years. So this becomes, and they've been putting on manure, so this becomes additive very quickly. And you know, how much, does anybody remember how much manure they put on in 1967? No, me neither. Zero.
Not that old.
Very good, I like that answer. But you can see that that's why this becomes so difficult to figure out, because we don't really know what went on years and years ago before we started to keep track of it. And even when we're keeping track of it, it's difficult to sort of get to these numbers. As a soil scientist, you know, I love numbers and I like looking at these things, but you know, maybe the rest of the world doesn't do that. But it is something you need to think about. And probably you don't necessarily need to know exactly what you're getting, but you do need to know that indeed that it happens. Okay, so when using manure, and being dairy folks, you're either going to be growing corn or you'll be growing grass, and there's certain times of the year that your crop is more effective in using the nutrients from the manure you're applying. And it depends on if you're growing corn or grass. We're going to plant corn, and we're going to start with corn, where you plant corn in the spring. When it starts to grow, it's sort of low, and then it starts to get really get on growing. It gets higher, and then there's a medium amount, and then about the 1st of August, this crop sort of slows down. It just sort of sits there, starts to mature. So demand for nitrogen, extremely low. So really, when you're growing corn and you are wanting to manage it, it doesn't really need any nitrogen after early August, so you really want to slow down, move that manure onto the grass crop. Because if you look on the grass crop, grass in the spring uses a lot of nitrogen up through about 2/3 of the year. Then it goes to medium. Demand, as different from corn, is low. You see no low amounts of grass during the normal growing season. So as a crop of using nitrogen, grass uses actually more nitrogen than corn does, because it grows over a much longer period of time. So it actually needs a little bit of N towards the end of the year, where corn definitely does not. Okay, so this we're going to skip because somebody else is going to cover that. Okay, so we're going to just sort of leave that there for a minute. So there is an extension bulletin which I really like. If you're managing silage corn, you want to know more about agronomic rates. This is silage corn. We have it up there. It has two little pieces in here that I think are really important take home, which are in the summary to begin with. It talks about nitrogen and how much nitrogen you put on, and how much you put on for getting the crop started. And then if you do, what we want you to do is do a post-side dress nitrate test, which is a soil sample when the corn's about yay big. You take a soil sample, depending on what that number is when you get it back, will then indicate how much nitrogen that crop's going to need, if it needs any. And there are rates on page 7 or page 8. It gives you a value for PSNT where it goes from 0 to 10 or 11 to 20, 21 to 25. If you're above 25 ppm nitrate in your soil sample at PSNT or post-side dress nitrogen test, that crop needs no more nitrogen. Where if it's less than that, it still needs some, and it gives you indication of how much to apply based on either a reading of 0 to 10 or 11 to 20. And they make some estimates at the bottom how many gallons given what kind of manure you have. And I'm going to get into sort of availability in a little bit. But this is a really good bulletin. If you want to know more about silage corn and nutrient management, this is the one to get. We have it up here, and this is on your manure page. Link to it, okay? So that's for the manure, that's for the agronomics on that. It goes more into phosphorus and it goes into to the other nutrients. Usually though, nitrogen is your limiting factor. Okay, let's leave it there because that's the next one I'm going to talk about now. Okay, so for manure rates for forages, this is the bulletin I like. This has a really big table, almost too big. On this page, it lists on one side, I don't know if you can turn to this. Can you flip through the pages? Let's go to page, they're unnumbered. Keep going. Oh, right there. Let's go to the top. Okay, good. So this is the table that is an awful lot. There's only a few lines on this that are really important. This lists a number of different crops, red clover. I can't read that in the light there, sorry. Whoa. Red clover, alfalfa, grasses, and corn and silage corns and grains. And it tells you how many cuttings you get in the first column. Then you go all the way over to the right side, and this tells you how much N that the crop is going to take up during its growth, given various things. If you look here, corn silage is 200 pounds, which would be general recommendation for growing corn, that it takes about 200 pounds of N. Where if you look at a perennial grass, medium high intensity, which is going to be here, that's going to be a 6-cut system. It's going to need 348 pounds of N, so quite a bit more N, which is why if you have a lot of manure, having a lot more grass is going to help you sort of get that sort of balanced out, because grasses use more N than corn does, and that's sort of where that comes from. And this table, the top part of this does it in a dry weight basis, and then the lower portion here, which you may find more useful, is on an as-is basis. So there's some, because it's on an as-is basis, it affects on what moisture content it is or dry matter content it is. So it's going to have a little more leeway in the way things are going, but it may actually mean a little bit more to you. I really like both those tables. But those are the two from agronomic rates that I would go to for guidance for helping this. The other thing that I really like is the part that somebody's going to do later is from an agronomic rate. I like to sit down in the spring, figure out what I'm going to do, look at my past records, know approximately what your manure contains, come up with a management plan on how you're going to manage it. We know it's a plan. It's a management plan, and you try to stick with that plan. And then at the end of the year, you come back and do your soil tests, your post-harvest soil tests. This will then give you an indication of how well your plan worked out, and you can sort of look at it and see how well you've sort of matched up as to where you're going. And from at that point, then figure out what you're going to do the next year. If need be, cut back, or if not, apply more if you've under applied. But that's sort of how that's supposed to work, is you figure out what you've put on, what you've applied, how you're doing management-wise for your post-harvest nitrate test, and that'll then help you figure out where you're going on things.
Question?
Yes.
I was just wondering about, have you got on that table winter cover crop planted after corn?
That would be the very last line here. Would be like if it's a triticale or a rye, that would be a small grain at boot stage. So that would then tell you that, if you're going to do that, that's going to take up, it's 190 pounds of N. So that's going to be good for catching that stuff up at the end of the year. And depending on how you manage the small grain, depending if you take it off for feed or plow it down, will sort of affect on how things work. Because if you're taking it off for feed, that then ends up back into your feed issue, and it doesn't go back into the pool of N, into the soil. So there's some management advantages to using a cover crop like that, particularly a rye or a triticale. Did that get to the answer? Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So
for our region, we do have higher protein levels than what constitutes this.
Yeah, these are book values, and your individual numbers are definitely going to differ. But you have to start somewhere, which is why we want to use the post-harvest soil nitrate test and do some testing, because it'll help you sort of figure out what's specific for your location. Because they also have here for an intensive thing, you know, they got 7 or 8 cuttings, 6 to 8 cuttings. You know, we're probably more in a 5 or 6 cutting range in this area. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about estimating plant available nitrogen. And on your tables, you'll find this bulletin, and that's where we're going to come from. Okay, so there's basically this publication, which is out of Oregon. This is by Dan Sullivan. You'll notice there's a number of bulletins out of Oregon by Dan Sullivan. He's a colleague of mine. He spent a lot of time working in manures, wasty products, with N availability, phosphorus availability. So I work with him a lot. He does a really good job. We try to, a number of our bulletins come out of either Oregon or Washington, and generally, if he's doing something, we're not going to do the same thing. We'll just use his, because for Washington and Oregon, we each have a lot of the same issues, so we figure one for both of us works pretty well. Okay, so the worksheet that's in here, when you look at it, we'll get to it in a little bit. It's used for determining manure application rates needed to supply a specific amount of plant available nitrogen. It can be used to estimate the dollar value from manure, plant available N, estimate N saved by tillage or direct application. Also, it can assess the balance between NP and K supplied by manure, which will tell you sort of how you want to do things. Also, it'll give a rough, long-term, 10-year estimate of plant available nitrogen from manure. So it gets to that sort of that unknown piece in a more general form. Okay, so the worksheets, you generally need a number of things to fill out these worksheets. Nitrogen, which would be analyzed for TKN, which would be total nitrogen. And then you'd also need your manure analyzed for ammonium nitrogen, or NH4-N. Phosphorus is P2O5. Potassium is K2O. And then manure dry matter, or total solids, how much moisture is in your Okay, so if you look through here, this is just sort of snapshots of what's in this piece here. And this sort of goes to, you work through, you enter your manure data, and you can either do it in tons if you're doing a solid material, or you can do liquid as in 1,000 gallons, or if you're in acre inches, you can do it as acre inches. And then this will give you, and then you enter your analysis for this year. So this has just some numbers that goes through it, and they're interactive as you do it. So then this will then you need to figure out how much available manure you may want to apply. So this is units per acre, 1,000 gallons, 20,000 gallons, you enter 20. And then this is the cost piece. If you know how much your nutrient is costing you, you can enter it in there, and it'll tell you how much value you're getting out of it. Okay? And then it'll give you an estimate of plant available nitrogen for how much ammonium that is retained in days, and how much is mineralized the first year, and then mineralized years 2 through 10. It also looks at P and K that is applied and the availability of it. Okay, so this now gives you the total pan that's available with plant available nitrogen from ammonium, and it goes to worksheet 2, which is the one that I like, and we're still struggling over there.
Which one are you trying to?
This is 8954. Six. 6. Yeah, let's go on up to the top. There you go. So this tells you the fraction of manure NH4 retained given certain management practices. So if you have a median incorporation, so you're injecting it from a slurry, I'm going to use as an example this 1 to 5% slurry, typical of what's probably in this area. If you inject it right away, you're going to retain 95% of the manure that the ammonium N you're applying. Where if you incorporate after 7 days or no incorporation, you're only going to capture about 55% of the ammonium N that's in there. So that goes to how you calculate the different N's. And you can see that incorporate after 1 day, it's 0.7. And if you are applying compost, you then, because compost has a much lower ammonium content, you actually capture it all. So that goes to tell you how much you're saving. And depending on how you are managing your manure, if you're injecting it or banning it, or with some incorporation, no incorporation, 80 to 90% retain of the manure ammonium N. So that gets to sort of that piece of how much is available and how you're going to get to plant available N. This slide I think is important because this shows you the relative availability or relative availability of plant available N from different materials. So this is lagoon water, which is a thin slurry. You capture a fair amount of it. Thick slurry, a little less capture of it. And then finally with compost, you have your least amount of the nitrogen retained from the manure. And this is typical, so if you're going to have a thin slurry, you're going to be able to get more N and retain more N from it rather than from the solid manure. Okay. And this just sort of shows you the different types of incorporation for if it's just sort of the placement, if it's just incorporated over the top, or banded with slight incorporation. And I think that sort of brings me to the end of those things with this one, it really makes sense to sit down and go through it yourself. It's a little confusing. It's not my favorite bulletin, but it works. I wish there was a spreadsheet that went along with this. It would be a little easier to deal with. But it will give you a good handle on how much plant available N that you're getting from your material if you want to use it for management purposes.